Hey everyone, my name is Laura Wheeler and I'm here in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And this is the first in a hopefully series of a chance to make an audio-visual version of some of the most read blog posts that I have. So today, one of the most read blog posts ever on my blog are about teacher interviews. There's a lot of need out there for people that are just coming out of teachers college or maybe have been supplying for a few years and are really trying to get on as a full-time teacher. The blog post I wrote had a lot of specific information to my school board and my province where I live. I'm going to cut that out of this version, and maybe at a later date I'll add another video that's specific to my school board. But for now, I'll go over sort of the general things that a teacher should know before going into an interview to become a teacher. So I'm going to switch over to screen share mode so you can see the blog post. And we'll get in here. All right, so teacher interviews. I really believe that it's important that just like students shouldn't be surprised by what's on a test, our school board, it should never be a surprise by what's on any school board's question topics. I know a lot of school boards will keep the specific questions secret, but it shouldn't be a secret as to the types of things you're expected to speak about when you're in your interview. I'm just going to skip through the parts that are specific to my school board. What should you bring to your interview? So you should bring a portfolio, and it should be tagged with the specific pieces that you plan to show during your interview, things like lesson plans, unit plans, student work, student feedback. Don't wait for the interviewers to ask to see your portfolio. Many of them won't. So offer pieces to view as you answer questions. So if you're explaining how you would plan a unit, pass around your portfolio to open a sample unit plan you've created. Your portfolio with your philosophy of teaching, certificates, can also be useful to yourself as you prepare your answers to the questions. It reminds you of your accomplishments that are worth mentioning during the interview. I would also bring copies of your resume and your cover letter. Even though you sent them in electronically when you applied to the posting, the admin team may not have a printed copy in front of them during the interview. In fact, they may not have even seen your resume or cover letter before interviewing you, or perhaps one of the 3 people interviewing you may have read it. So make sure to include links to your classroom website, Twitter feed, and or blog on your resume as well. And I'd bring a pen and paper. They're usually going to give you a copy of pen and paper before to prepare your answers, but it's a good thing to bring with you just in case. So what should you wear? Dress professionally. I'll keep this short as I think this one's fairly common sense, but for men, nice slacks, dress pants or khakis, a button-up collared shirt and tie, facial hair nicely groomed. For women, dress pants or knee-length skirt with a nice top or sweater, nothing too short or low cut, nothing skin tight, no leggings unless they're covered by a skirt or a dress, no crazy standout jewelry, simple shoes, subtle makeup, hair nicely groomed. You want to be well put together, and you want to stand out for your teaching reasons and not for what you are wearing or your makeup or your hair. So you need to arrive early. You'll be given 15 to 30 minutes before your stated interview time in most of the cases that I know of to prepare your answers to the questions. From what I know, in a half-an-hour interview, there are usually 5 to 7 questions listed on a sheet of paper. You'll be given a private space where you can compose some notes to help you answer those questions. And the question sheet and your notes will be collected from you at the end of the interview. So don't be surprised that they don't let you leave with your copy of your notes. The interviews, at least in my area, are usually conducted by a principal and 1 or 2 vice principals. In Ontario here, teachers are not allowed to sit in on interviews, although in other places, other provinces, other countries, in the States, I believe, sometimes the lead teacher or department head might be sitting in on the interviews as well. Here, the interviews last approximately 30 minutes, which gives you about 5 minutes per answer. The interviewers will be taking notes about your answers as you talk, so they may not look at you very often, so don't be insulted by that. Try not to talk too fast. I'm very guilty of that. As you can tell from my video, I'm a fast talker. But I definitely try and slow down my talking when I'm in an interview so that they can write everything down. So let's get into the types of topics that you should be prepared to speak to. So often it starts with a tell us about yourself type question. Almost every interview I've had has started with this one, and they're really not looking for a narrative. You know, I was born in 1981 and so on. So use this opportunity to give a snapshot of your teaching background and positions. It might also be a good spot to explain where you see yourself going and how the current position that you're applying for fits into your long-range plan. Classroom management, behavior discipline. So the question might be a generic, tell us about your behavior management philosophy. It might be more situational, such as tell us about a time when you had a difficult student in terms of behavior and how you responded. The solution part is really important there in your answer. Or a student in your class exhibits behavior X, how do you handle it? So it could be a student in your class continuously is talking while you're trying to teach, how do you handle it? Another topic is explain to us how you would teach X, X being a certain topic or a unit. It could be a whole unit, it could be one specific lesson. Many colleagues have suggested having a sample unit plan and one lesson plan that you have created for the course for which you're interviewing. That's something that could be kept in your portfolio. At the very least, you should have looked at the curriculum documents for the course before the interview so that you have a working knowledge of the expectations. You don't want to be surprised by those in your interview. Assessment and evaluation. This is almost guaranteed to be one of the questions in no matter which school board you're attending. Assessment and evaluation is a large part of what we do as teachers. And so in the OCDSB, we've gone to a standards-based grading approach. No matter which school board you're going to be applying to, I really suggest that you become familiar with the assessment and evaluation policies for your district. And they might also be slightly different from those for the province or state that you're in. So make sure you get a hold of the documentation for assessment and evaluation. Make sure you're familiar with it if your own program at the university in teacher education did not cover those. Collegiality and teamwork. So some of the questions that you might be asked. Explain a time when you have worked as part of a team to run or create X, X being some sort of project or lesson. Or something like you are creating an exam for a common course with one of your colleagues, but you're having trouble agreeing on what to include. What do you do? IEP special education. So certain questions like describe how you ensure that you meet the needs and accommodations for students with IEPs in your classroom. And they may be called different things elsewhere. So IEP is our individualized education plan, and it's for students that have a special need that has been identified in our school, and to tell us the accommodations and modifications that have been made for that student. So here, the administration is looking to make sure that you're familiar with what the IEP is, that you understand that you're responsible for it, and how you go about making sure those accommodations are met in your classroom. Another type of question that they might ask you, a parent emails you concerned that his child's accommodation as per the IEP are not being met. What do you do? A lot of sort of situational what do you do type questions are really popular right now, as you can see. Differentiation for gifted and remedial. So don't just think of differentiation for either your low achieving students, at-risk students, or your high achieving students. It's really about both, so make sure you address both here. So it might be something like, tell us about a lesson in which you differentiated your instruction, or you have a student who has significant gaps in her learning. What do you do? Or you have a student who consistently finishes his work well ahead of his classmates. What do you do? Critical thinking. In the last couple of years, many schools have included critical thinking into their school goals and improvement plans. If you're unfamiliar with what critical thinking entails in teaching, you may wish to look at a few documents. I know I attended a workshop by Garfield Ginny Newman on his work, which was really formative for me many years ago. And more recently, Peter Liljedahl's Thinking Classroom Framework, which most people know about for the math classroom, but is really easily adaptable for other classrooms as well. So I've left a few links in the blog post, and the link for this blog post is down below in the comments of this video. I'm going to skip over the SIPSA goals. This is specific to our school board. It's our school improvement plan. But you might want to check out for whichever school you're applying and school board. You might want to find out what sort of plans they have in place, long-term plans, and make sure you're familiar with them. If you know a teacher at that school, it's great to get in touch with them and ask them what the focus of the school is that year and over time. because a good interviewer will ask you questions related to the school's improvement focus, be that building community, increasing achievement of our at-risk students. So you want to be familiar with those. I'm going to skip this section here, but just to say every school board, every province has many documentation of policies and frameworks. And often, unless you're actually in that school board teaching currently, you wouldn't know what they are. They're not always on the front page of that school board's website. School boards' website are often more geared towards publicizing to the parents and promoting to the parents. They're not so much to show teachers the policies they need to be familiar with. So again, seek out somebody in that school board or in that school, find out which documentation is current and important to the school board, and make sure you've read them and are familiar with them, as questions from them can crop up. And certainly it'll be impressive if you're able to reference them during your interview. You want to be ready to address technology. So explain to us how you incorporate technology into your classroom. You want to have specific examples to share, and you want to describe the impact it has had on student understanding of the learning goals that you've set out for your students. Communication. There are often some questions relating to communication with colleagues, parents, and/or students. That might be digital communication. It might also just be face-to-face communication. Extracurricular involvement, so a question such as how will you get involved at our school? While we're not paid to be involved extracurricularly, this is really a question about your intention to be involved in the school community. Why you? Sometimes this is the final question in an interview. So the question might be, what sets you apart from other candidates? Why should we hire you over other qualified candidates? This is sort of a chance to brag. Many of us don't feel comfortable with that, but you need to brag a little bit about your strengths to make sure that they understand why you'd be a great candidate for the position. This is maybe also a really great spot to stick in any responses that you haven't, or any experiences you haven't had a chance to speak to yet during the interview, especially if this is your last question. ELL, English Language Learners. So a question such as, explain how you support ELL students in your classroom. Many sort of behavioral situational questions. So the format of describe a time when X happened, what you did, and the result. So X could be a lesson that didn't go as planned, or a student misbehaving, you having a conflict with a colleague, a parent that was unhappy. The list here is really endless. So there are some that are more common than others. You might want to predict what you think they might ask you and have some answers prepared for that. What would you do if situational questions? There is an endless number of situational questions that could be asked in this format too. What would you do if 60% of your students failed the most recent test? So come up with questions you think would be good ones and practice them. You should have an idea of how you would answer these. This is also a good time to mention that if you're answering questions and you haven't experienced what they're asking you about, if this were to happen, I would is a perfectly acceptable answer. And I find the key in those, if I haven't experienced it myself, is to mention, of course, that I will be seeking out mentorship from a colleague or a department head if that situation were to arise, so that I could properly address it and get collaboration from my colleagues that have more experience with that situation to help me. At-risk learners, the best I can do on this one is a quick Google search for your school board and at-risk learner. I don't see a lot of documentation on it for my own school board, but I have heard of different school boards asking about what we do for at-risk learners. In our province, I know our government is spending some money in math, at least, with the renewed math strategy, to target our at-risk learners and try to bring them up one level of achievement. And that's something that's happened since this blog post was written, so I would probably speak to that. So find out what your school board or your school is doing to help at-risk learners so that you're prepared to address that question. Professional development and learning. So a question such as, tell us about the last book you read to further your own learning about teaching and education, or tell us how you keep up to date with current teaching practices. These days, a lot of my own learning is online. I'm here on YouTube. So personally, I might redirect the question to be more about something I've read online rather than a book. On many teacher blogs and Twitter accounts that I follow, and explain that part of my professionalism, professional development, as opposed to the book learning, which I still do, but less so than online learning. So I'm sure that there are many interview topics or questions that you've encountered that I forgot here. I would love for you to leave a comment below the video or send them to me via Twitter. I'm at Wheeler_Laura, and I'll add them to the list for everyone to benefit from. And so just finally, in my school board and in many school boards, you are entitled to request a debrief from your interviewers, regardless of whether or not you were successful in the interview process. You should always take advantage of this opportunity to hear about your strengths and your weaknesses from the interviewer. This process provides you with the information you need in order to improve your interview skills for the next round. And if you do request a debriefing, make sure you show up to it. I've heard of some teachers that don't show up to their debrief meeting, even though they've booked it with a principal. That principal's taken time to meet with you, and it's not going to look good for your next interview with that principal if you don't show up to your debrief. And just a quick note at the bottom here. So if you go to the blog post that this is based on, I have a second blog post, which is a principal's perspective on teacher interviews. I'm just a teacher in my school board. I don't actually run the interview process, so I'm coming at this from somebody as the interviewee. And so I have this great blog post that talks about the process from the perspective of a principal. He answers some questions so that you can see what he thinks he's looking for and principals are looking for when they interview teachers. So that's a really great one to check out as well. And a video on how to use visual note-taking to prepare for an interview. I'm super into sketchnoting these days, and so that really piqued my interest in my last interview. I definitely took advantage of some visual note-taking to get my notes ready. And then one bonus little article here at the bottom, 5 things you think principals want to hear and what they really want to hear. So I hope this has been useful to you. I know that teachers out there are thirsty for this information because it's constantly, this blog post is my top blog pick or blog post read on my blog, even 4 years now after it was posted. It was posted in 2014, and I'm trying to keep it up to date. So I would love, again, to hear about what topics or questions that you have experienced in your interview process. And if you're headed into an interview, best of luck. You got this.